Alright guys, so we've gotten 2 requests for mod guides right now, and by far the more requested one is not this guy, but instead this. So, the Artemis is a pump-action Springer-style rival blaster, and it's the 2017 model. Very popular so far at Wars, but I think it needs a little bit of addition and a little bit more power to it. So, let's go ahead and crack this open and see what's inside.
Okay, so getting into the Artemis is just like getting into any other Nerf blaster, except the foregrip is actually pinned into place internally, which means that you have to come in with some very thin flathead screwdrivers or any sort of wedge that you might have and kind of pry them off and create pressure on equal and opposite sides. You can see I'm using screwdrivers as pins to wedge off those red pieces, at which point it will butterfly normally. Then the rest of the shell is just like opening up any other Nerf blaster. Remove all of the screws, including the 2 that hold that back cap on, and then it'll simply open up just like that. Like I said, any other Nerf blaster, and you get a really good look at the internals. So this gives you a really good real-time look at these internals and how they operate on one of those gear trains, and how you've got that soft white plastic gear operating between the priming bar and the actual internals themselves, driving that plunger back. Then we're going to time-lapse through breaking down the entirety of the blaster, and you get to see just how incredibly layered the Artemis is. There's a separate unit for its cylinder, there's a separate unit for the gear train, and it kind of connects and meshes into those 3 internal magazines. Now, the cylinder itself makes a ton of sense. You can see how it stores rounds inside it. There is, of course, an air restrictor, and the spring powering this plunger is actually quite potent. It's alliteration aside, it's a very strong spring, and I think that it's honestly been balanced to that white plastic gear so that it will function for a long time. I think that upgrading it is honestly not the best idea. I also took apart the magazine followers, just kind of playing with the idea of whether or not I could get an extra round into them if I cut them down. And while I think that it's possible, I think that you'd lose a lot of that inherent smoothness just because of how those springs nest inside. Now, then we figured out how to isolate the plunger mechanism there, and we were very disappointed with that entire system. So the sad truth is that we took 1 lock out of this Artemis and didn't really do anything else. The additions that we're making are just replacements of 3D printed parts to make it more ergonomic and give it additional features. I still love the Artemis, and I think that it's really sweet, but similar to way back when, if you guys recall my Thunderbow quote-unquote mod guide, this is not really a modifiable blaster, at least in the sense of I don't think that it's worth it. The amount of effort and delicacy in taking apart and putting back together this blaster is immense. This video segment goes to show you that there were 3 of us just struggling and watching and messing around with this, getting it back together, and it was still a huge pain, but we did get it back together. It's just an exercise in making sure that a couple of those pieces are aligned properly on the gear train, and then it sandwiches back together. Luckily, you can reassemble it in layers, so as long as you have the order of operations correct, you are good to go. Let's take a look at it back on the bench though.
Alright guys, so that's the Artemis mod guide, and I'm sorry it's not as much of a mod guide as we're used to, but frankly the Artemis has a lot of things going against it in terms of its modification potential. We did completely remove that lock, and we did a total teardown, and we kind of thought about some of the things that we could change. For instance, we could get these to totally fit 11 rounds each, but I'm not sure if it was worth the consistency that comes with having this kind of cupping, sort of concave thing push the balls forward. So, I don't know, I really like how it functions stock, and I don't think that it's going to get much better. It's a real pity that they have those white plastic, which is kind of soft, built into the gear train, and a plunger tube that's so incredibly difficult to extract and work with. It's just really not worth the marginal FPS gains that you would get from replacing it, in addition to the fact that I think it would destroy itself. However, in addition to the lock removal, there are 2 things that you will notice are new. EOC's parts look insane.
So printed in translucent red, first we have this angled foregrip. It's got stops here, and the fang signature subtly kind of built into it. I really like the translucent red. I think that it complements the red and translucent pretty well. So then on the other side, you can see that this is held in with 4 machine screws. Technically only these 2 are necessary, but we added these ones so that it absolutely can't come apart, and it will be super duper stable, and you're not going to pinch your fingers. It wraps into the grooves just like the stock part, but is actually not only functionally more comfortable, aesthetically nicer, but less of a pain to get on and off, which is nice. And then this replacement in the back here not only gives you that same bandolier attachment point, but also in translucent red we have a stock attachment point. Now I do have the worker buffer tube stock, and I have my Magpul cheek rest here. This is the relatively nice one with the locking feature. So let's cut back and show you kind of how these things function, and then we'll do a quick firing demo for you.
So let's go ahead and throw this stock on to our attachment point. Fits on like that, locks just like an in-strike stock, and then it actually doesn't need to be that long. The way that these parts are designed, they work with the stock internals, and these stock internals have so little attachment point, and they're held in by a screw down in here that's just a regular Nerf Hasbro screw, that they're not actually that stable. You're almost better off with a lighter weight stock, but slide this all the way down and then lock it, and that isn't bad at all. The weight also displaces and kind of gives you something to work with there. But now we are good to go. We can use our angled foregrip and this is sweet, guys. Like, the Artemis in general is a very fun, very functional primary, but I think that the angled foregrip makes it way more comfortable, and then the stock attachment point gives you something to rest up against as you're using it. I really, really like this setup. Even though the modifications themselves kind of fell flat, I think that the accessories made a world of difference with this blaster. Now, we haven't quite decided if we're going to be selling these parts. Of course, EOC designed them and I'm just using them. But if we do wind up selling them, they will be in our eBay store in the description box below, and you can check that out. If you'd like to pick up an Artemis of your very own, my review will be linked in the description box, as well as a buy link on Amazon. And buying them through that link actually helps out the channel as well. So thank you guys very much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed this modification guide, but I enjoyed making it. I really enjoyed getting to take a look inside at how this mechanism worked. It worked more or less how I thought it would, but I was, of course, very, very disappointed by the quality of that gear train. Much love, Nerf on, Drac out.